Okay. Hi.
Hi.
So we are doing a redo.
Yeah, so this was originally recorded February 11th, 2024. However, the audio was messed up. I think I'd come to your place to do it,
Yes.
and something with your internet was weird or something. I don't know. And then
And
we
we
used
lost like
my
half of the
computer.
episode. We lost like half the episode.
Yeah, so. And Tovri was sick the last couple weeks, so she hadn't
I got
really.
that really bad stomach bug that was going around.
Yeah, she missed work and everything.
I did.
And that girl never misses work. Not unless she's really sick, so.
One time I called off work. I took a personal day so I could finish a book last year.
Oh. I've gone home early because I'm falling asleep at my desk because I have chronic fatigue syndrome, but I don't tell anybody I have chronic fatigue syndrome.
Well, now all of our listeners know that you have chronic fatigue syndrome.
Yeah, but I don't think they listen because, I'm not important, so.
You're important.
Okay, so I had given you the option of two different cases, and you chose this one. So
I did because I didn't like the word massacre.
Yeah.
The other one was a massacre.
Okay, well, I'm still going to do that one.
Well, do you want to talk about some of the updates with Maddie?
Yeah, we can. I want to put it out there that Chad Daybell's jury selection starts tomorrow, April 1st, April Fool's Day, and it's no April Fools.
Okay, Chad Daybell.
Yeah, and he's actually eligible for the death penalty, and that would be by firing squad there.
Is Lori?
No, they're being held separately. She's already had a trial.
Well, she's guilty anyways, so.
Yeah, she was guilty, but she won't get life in prison. The death penalty wasn't on for her because she conspired, but they don't have any proof that she physically actually killed anybody.
No, I think she was the mastermind.
She was the mastermind. She had her brother involved
Alex
with
or whatever.
Yeah, her brother killed the husband, and then the children. And Chad apparently killed his wife, Tammy. And then I think it was 2 weeks later he married
Lori. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't even think the wife was dead yet, and Lori was looking at weddings.
Oh yeah, they were involved. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, they were definitely involved before Tammy died, but yeah. And Chad Daybell had predicted her death or something.
Yes.
He knew it was gonna happen.
Of course he did.
Yeah. Yeah, nothing more on the Maddie Soto case. Mom is missing. People suspect that she is in a mental. She had a mental breakdown and is in, a mental rehab facility. Which she has bipolar. So I mean, it's possible. It's totally possible.
I know Reddit's not very kind to her, and neither is Vinnie Politan. I have been listening to him every day, pretty much.
Do you listen to him on the court TV, or do you listen to him on his own personal podcast on his? Because he does an hour show on his own Facebook and YouTube account, and then he does his hour show on court TV. So you can get him actually 2 hours a day.
Oh, well, I think I watch him on court TV. I think I watch him on YouTube. Well, I watch him on YouTube. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I watch him on YouTube, but
yeah.
I know Steven Stearns is
charged.
Stefan, sorry. Whatever, tomato. He's charged with 60 counts of child
indecency.
SA
Mm-hmm.
And I know Vinnie Politan was like, there's like 400 some photos.
Yes. Over. Yep.
And mom didn't know that there was 400 some photos.
They all happened in the summer. So was he babysitting her in the summer while mom worked and grandma wasn't available? They were all like the same time frame when he did it.
Yes, from being 11 until, yeah.
And he's been in her life since 11. She was 6. So I'm sure he was grooming her. I think they had pictures of her as an 8-year-old.
Oh, I heard 11, but you've been covering it longer.
Yeah, I think I heard 8, but he was in her life since she was 6, apparently.
And then they had that app. There was an app that they found he was on, and he was like active at like 11 o'clock at night. And this app makes it so, or like, it's almost like a Discord server, but I believe Discord's.
Well, some of their legalese stuff tells these users that they will not release to law enforcement anything that's on.
That's so sketch, but I mean, whatever.
That's how you get it on the dark web.
Yeah. I wonder how many photos were moved that way.
Yeah, I don't know. You would have thought that, I don't know, maybe they won't say anything because they don't want to injure the victim any more than she's already been injured.
Now, the guy on Court TV, Vinnie Politan, then there's another guy. He was down in Florida, and he did the walk.
Is that Bryant?
Yeah, I don't know what his name. I'm not very good with names.
Okay.
But he walked from the church parking lot to the school.
Oh yes, I saw that. Yeah.
And he's like, it's kind of a little sketchy for a 12-year-old.
Yeah, because she was just.
I saw that. There's like a bridge that she would have had to walk under. There was construction that she would have had.
High traffic.
Yes. Yep. And she would have had to walk on the street at one point.
And apparently she had never been dropped off that far away from school before. She was usually dropped off at the school. So I think
school does to answer your question, school starts at 9:30.
Yeah, I had asked that. Yeah, because our schools here start at 8.
Yes.
So
and schools in Florida start at 9:30.
And that would be, accurate if mom's picking her up after 4, because if their school starts that late, their school would end that late.
Yes. Yep. Harmony Montgomery, they finally filed to file her as legally deceased. I think mom wanted that. Do you see that?
I haven't seen that, but that's probably, I don't know if they had insurance money on her, or
there was something with legally filing for her to be legally deceased or something. There was
maybe so they could put a
tombstone
up or something.
And then Gypsy Rose and her husband are separating.
Right. Shocking. I guess that D wasn't so fire after all.
Well, apparently he lost his teaching job.
Well, yeah.
And then, well, before Gypsy got out, after she got out, and there was like all these TV shows about her, there was a point where she had said like, we weren't gonna stay together because he was just too controlling, and I got out of a controlling situation, and now I'm back in a controlling situation. So I'm wondering if that has something to do with their separation.
I read today,
I know she deleted.
The dad said that she's kind of impulsive.
That's not surprising, but
right. I mean, given her history.
I know she said she's living in the bayou with her family.
With her father and her stepmother. Yeah. With their parents.
And then
She has an OnlyFans. Anybody want to contribute money to her? You can go to Dips Rose.
But she wants to stay out of the public, so she deleted social media.
But she left her OnlyFans up.
Well,
girls got to make that money somehow.
Yeah.
What photos?
I would do it. Okay, so you're talking about
sell her dirty underwear. They do that too.
Yes, they do. That's what Piper did in Orange is the New Black. He started a whole ring and everything. I don't know if the actual Piper did it. I just know the TV show Piper did it.
Wait, so is that based on a real story?
Yes.
Oh. Wow.
But the real Piper marries the boyfriend or the fiance that she was with when she went into prison, not Alex. But that's what she did, and that's what she did in the TV show. I don't know if she did that in the.
Interesting.
Okay, Betty Broderick.
Betty Broderick. We weren't supposed to tell them that it was Betty Broderick we're talking about.
Oh, we just did.
Okay, sorry. Welcome to the Let's Get Paranoid podcast. Thank you for listening, and I hope you stay for the entire episode. Please like, share, and subscribe. If you like our content, please listen to our other episodes. We really appreciate all of our listeners and hope you have as much fun listening as we do in preparing each episode with our listeners in mind. I must issue a trigger warning. This episode discusses an actual true crime case involving murder. Please note that this episode is not safe for children to overhear and may not be suitable for listening at work, like I do. This episode is for entertainment purposes only, for freaky people like me who are, air quotes, entertained by true crime and murder cases. Shout out to all you freaks out there. Woo!
Oh my.
Okay, so what do Meredith, Baxter Burney, Dirty John, and Court TV all have in common?
Well, I still don't know, but I do know that Dirty John, when we originally recorded it, I was like, Dirty John, why does Dirty John sound so familiar? And then we got into the tangent about, I'm Dirty Dan. No, I'm Dirty Dan. And then there was Pinhead Larry, and Patrick goes, who are you calling Pinhead?
So what do Meredith, Baxter Burney, Dirty John, and Court TV all have in common?
Dirty John, is that the guy who lied about all his, like, he had like a doctor, he's a doctor. Am I talking, it's the same guy, he's a doctor but not really a doctor, and he married this rich woman. And
Cass, what do Meredith, Baxter Burney, Dirty John, and Court TV all have in common?
Listen, as a true crime baby here, I don't know, other than the fact they have funky names. I don't know.
Who's Dirty John?
I'm Dirty Dan.
Dirty Dan?
From
Lieutenant
SpongeBob.
Dan? What?
That's SpongeBob.
Dirty Dan?
Dirty Dan.
Who's Dirty Dan?
I'm Dirty Dan.
No, Lieutenant Dan.
Patrick.
I'm Dirty Dan. No, I'm Dirty Dan.
But Dirty John, he was a guy, I believe they lived in Florida. I'm not sure. My phone, I can't look it up. But he pretended to be a doctor, and he wore these scrubs. And
did he sleep at a Holiday Inn the night before?
I don't know. He got with this lady.
Did he play a doctor on TV?
No, he pretended to be a real doctor, but he didn't have a job or anything.
He slept at the Holiday Inn the night before it.
Oh, did he?
No.
Oh, okay.
Go.
Well, anyways, so this guy, he had married this lady, and she had like a lot of money. And it came out that he wasn't actually a doctor, and people were like, well, yeah, no, he would show up to parties late, but his scrubs at the bottom of his uniform were all like torn up, and people were like, doctors don't.
No scrubs.
Yeah, they don't.
Well, I'm specifically talking about Dirty John season 2.
Okay, well,
So
I was
there
talking
was a
about the
season
OG.
1, and then season 2.
And season 1 is about the OG Dirty John. The
Yeah.
daughter actually ends up killing him because he was trying to kill her.
So this week we are talking about Big Bad Betty Broderick. Do you know who she is?
Well, I do now, but
You do now, but you didn't before. You were a
didn't.
Betty stan, weren't you? You loved Betty. You were on Betty's side.
But you threw me a curveball. You did throw me a
I did.
curveball
I did.
because you were describing her husband first, and then I said, "Oh, we don't like him,"
Right.
and you were like, "Well, I don't know," and then you started talking about her, and I was like, "Oh no, we don't like her."
Right. Right. You guys are all Betty fans. Betty fans. Betty fans. And I was like, you're gonna find out because that bitch is crazy. Okay, so Elizabeth, spelled with an S, not a Z. That's your first cue that she's crazy. Elizabeth Ann Biscaglia Broderick was born November 7th, 1947, making her a
April?
November.
Oh, Scorpio.
And like many future serial killers or killers, was a Scorpio. Apologies to all the Scorpios out there who don't have the proclivity towards murder and destruction.
I am taking offense to that because I am heavily Scorpio. I might be a Capricorn, but my chart is heavily Scorpio. Therefore, I am in some types of way a Scorpio, so I am taking offense for my Scorpios.
Elizabeth was the third child of 6 children of Frank and Marita Biscaglia, who co-owned a plastering business. Her mother was Irish and her father was Italian. They were what?
Me too.
Oh yeah,
Italian.
You have Irish.
And Irish.
Too.
Yeah.
On your pappy's side too. Yeah. They were strict Catholics and had extremely high expectations for all of their children. Betty later recalled her upbringing and stated, "Go to Catholic schools. Be careful with dating until you find a Catholic man. Support him while he works. Be blessed in your later years with beautiful grandchildren." Betty followed her parents' instructions and went to Catholic school and college, graduating with a degree in early childhood education and a minor in English. And that is true what they say about, Catholics. Like, when you have a boyfriend, is he Catholic? Is he Catholic? My noni, her thing was, is he Italian? Is he Italian? But my dad's thing was, is he Catholic? So.
Oh, that's surprising that it
What?
came from him.
Yeah, it was him.
Not from grandma.
No. But I mean, I'm sure she went through it with her, with Noni, my dad was not Italian.
No.
So, and my aunt didn't marry an Italian either. I don't even know if he was Catholic, but my mom at least married a Catholic, so that was better.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so he wasn't Italian, but he was Catholic, so. And then your dad, when I married him, he's Catholic, so. Okay, so in 1965, Betty met a young man named Dan Broderick. At the time, he was a 21-year-old medical student, while Betty was a naive 17-year-old. So he's born in 1944 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and was the oldest child of a very large Irish Catholic family. This is an important detail as his background religiously was quite similar to Betty's background from her hometown in Bronxville, New York. In finding Dan, it appeared that the teachings from her youth were coming to fruition, finding a good Catholic boy, marrying him, and starting a family together. Betty later said of Dan never once wavered from his goal of making me his wife. He would wait, he would do and say whatever was necessary, even agreeing with me when he didn't, and doing things I wanted to do when he didn't, until he had me. Nobody ever used the terms obsessive compulsive or stalker back then, but that is what he was. Remember, those are her words, her opinions. Are they fact-based? I'm not sure. I think that's where you were like totally like pro Betty and anti Dan at that point.
Yeah.
Betty later said of Dan never once wavered from his goal of making me his wife. He would wait, he would do and say whatever was necessary, even agreeing with me when he didn't, and doing things I wanted to do when he didn't, until he had. Nobody ever used the terms obsessive compulsive or stalker back then, but that is what he was.
So we don't like this man?
He sounds sketchy.
It's funny that she says that about him. That's what I'll say.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing what I know now, I think it's funny that's what she says.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Dan and Betty eventually married on April 12th, 1969. Betty quickly became pregnant, as a good Catholic girl would, and gave birth to their first child, Kim, in 1970. After Kim was born, Betty gave birth to 4 more children, daughter Lee in 71, and sons Daniel in 76 and Rhett in 79. Betty and Dan also had a baby boy they did not name, who passed away 4 days after his birth. So I'm assuming that that was between Lee and Daniel, between 71 and 76. Dan and Betty struggled financially for a long time in the early years of their marriage, as many young families do. After Kim was born, Dan completed his medical degree, but still was unsure about his career path. He decided to return to law school to combine his medical knowledge with a JD degree. I did not know what a JD degree was, so I had to look it up. Wikipedia says that a JD degree is a graduate entry professional degree that primarily prepares individuals to practice law. In the United States, it is the only qualifying law degree. During this time, the family struggled to survive while Dan returned to graduate school, and Betty supplemented the family's income to support them. Eventually, Dan graduated and was hired by a prestigious San Diego, California law firm. Dan, Betty, and the kids moved from New York to the residential community of La Jolla. Betty continued to work by selling Tupperware and Avon while raising their children in their new hometown.
I can't imagine selling Avon and Tupperware was like super easy, because even selling Avon now or Tupperware, it's.
Well, I mean, they would go.
Maybe it would have been a little easier because there's
door to door, and everybody was housewives, so there was always a woman at home, and she always wanted to look, be impressive for her husband, or you always need Tupperware for those leftovers. But so like that's what women did back then. That was their work, because they really weren't, I don't want to say permitted, but they weren't as prominent working outside the home. Their work was inside the home. So they catered to other women who were inside the home.
I would not want to be knocking on everybody's door.
Well, and then they would go to like the mommy groups and stuff, and you would take your little Avon book and,
Actually, we had solicitors here the other week.
Oh, but you have a sign on your door saying no solicitors.
Well, so I said, you do know there's a no soliciting sign. And they were like, oh, well, yada, yada, yada. And I was like, it doesn't matter. No soliciting. I can call the cops on you. And he said, oh, well, the people around really like whenever I come here. And
was it the guy about the dryer vents?
No. No, he had a kid with him, and they were dropping pamphlets off. And I said, it doesn't matter. Like, I can call the cops on you. No soliciting means no soliciting. And he was like, okay, well, people really like whenever I come here and blah, 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 blah. And I was like, okay, well, just don't come here.
I'm not people. Don't come here.
Yeah. I don't have a welcome sign.
You don't. Tell them. Look at my sign.
I just have a sign that says, hope you like plants. Anyways, go ahead.
Okay. Okay, so in 1982, Dan was doing quite well at the law firm. Now remember, Betty became what they called a socialite. You know what a socialite is? That's like, the wife of a prestigious man, and they have money, and she, goes to lavish lunches, and, she frolics with the rich women of the community and stuff. So she was a socialite.
That's what Linda thought she was in one episode of Bob's Burgers. Well, not really a socialite, but she thought she was, she thought
Listen,
she
Linda.
was, she
Listen,
thought she was
Linda.
important because
Just go flip those burgers.
Bob told her that he was taking like boating lessons or something, but really he was going to the arcade, and yeah.
Well, Lindsay wasn't cheating on her.
And she shows up and she's got like boat earrings, and she's got
Oh, because he's taking boating lessons because he's going to drive his yacht. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
I love Bob's Burgers.
Oh my God. Okay, so in 1982, Dan was doing quite well at the law firm, and he hired a 21-year-old woman named Linda Kokina as his legal assistant. By October of 1983, a year after Linda was hired at the firm, cracks started to emerge within Betty and Dan's marriage, and Betty started to believe that Dan was having an affair with Linda, although Dan denied these allegations at first. The marriage continued to crumble, and Dan moved out of the home in February 1985.
I wonder if she I don't know. Doesn't sound very secure with herself, that's for sure.
There have been many biographies of Betty Broderick discussing the breakdown of the marriage and the allegations made about Dan, Linda, and Betty. Remember, I am not here to shame the victims or make it out that they deserve what happened to them. No one deserves to be tortured in their own home, in their own bedroom, by an ex-spouse who ends up assassinating them both in cold blood. Some biographies have displayed that Dan and Linda were emotionally and financially abusive towards Betty, and she had just had enough and had a momentary lapse in judgment, resulting in the murder of Dan and Linda Broderick. I would like to remain factual in my discussion of the case and try not to let Betty's perspective tarnish the memory of Dan and Linda. However, remember, the dead can't speak up for themselves, so we really only have the words of Betty herself and those friends and family members who were there to experience this tragic circumstance. Back to Dan moving out. He moved out in 1985 and took custody of the 4 living children one by one, as Betty would eventually drop the children off for Dan to care for and not return to pick them up. Due to this, Dan eventually was granted sole legal custody of his children, further instigating more of Betty's bad behavior. Betty has stated that eventually Dan admitted his affair with Linda, and a very messy divorce ensued. Later on, Oprah Winfrey named the divorce as the messiest divorce in the country.
And I said, you get a divorce, and you get a divorce, and you get a divorce. You all get divorces. Yeah.
You get a divorce, and you get a divorce.
You all get a divorce. Woohoo.
Okay. Why does she have any part of this?
Well, because it was a very popular case back in the 80s and 90s. That's funny. They're all sitting underneath your chair. All you have to do is pick up the papers and sign. Yeah. While the marriage was dissolving, Dan's career was starting to take off. He was doing so well at the law firm, he was also able to serve as the president of the San Diego Bar Association. Because of Dan's prominence in the law and order community, Betty reflected that during the divorce, his career and contacts made it extremely difficult for her to find counsel that would represent her. Was it the fact that they would be going against another ruthless lawyer in court? Or was Betty's personality too difficult to deal with for the lawyers who did consider working with her? Legitimately, I personally believe it was a little bit of both. So I do think the law was stacked against her. He had a lot of friends in the attorney life, and they didn't want to. They didn't want to get involved in
They
a
want to get involved, yeah.
Yeah, or they knew how crazy Betty was, according to Dan. They knew how crazy she was, and they only knew Dan's side of the story. Or, when they heard Betty's side of the story, it didn't add up with what they knew from Dan's side of the story, and there was a conflict of interest there. So,
yeah.
So she had to go, I guess, out of her way to find lawyers, and I guess paying for lawyers was difficult as well. We'll get into the money later. After 5 long years of divorce proceedings, Dan and Betty's divorce was finalized in 1989. The previous 5 years had been difficult for both Dan and Betty, and during each part of the divorce, Betty's behavior became more and more erratic and unstable. Betty was constantly calling Dan on the phone and leaving inappropriate messages on the answering machine. Remember those? You remember an answering machine? You don't remember answering machines, do you?
Yes, I do. Trauma.
You
Trauma. Yeah.
And even having the younger children leave messages on the phone, referring to Linda as the "see you next Tuesday."
Hey, Pleasant.
Uh,
I only say that. I only say that because Pleasant and I are always like, "See you next Tuesday," or like it's a
Yeah.
running thing between us. And actually, our coworker Ryan didn't know what a "See you next Tuesday" was, and I was like, "Oh yeah, it was, whatever."
Ryan and his virgin ears.
Yes, yes. And he was like flabbergasted. He didn't know what it was.
That's a bad word. See you next Tuesday.
Actually, for the 4th of July, it worked out perfectly because we were like, "See you next Tuesday" or whatever. Because we leave Thursday,
Yeah.
and we were like, "See you next Tuesday." So that was the
funny.
running thing. Yeah.
That's funny. Okay. Dan tried to protect himself and the children by getting restraining orders, but this did not distract Betty from continuing to torture and harass Dan and Linda verbally and mentally. Betty would break into their home and vandalize it. One time, she actually drove up straight into Dan's front door with her car,
Which
because
I don't understand.
air quotes, needed to speak to Dan. I needed to speak to Dan.
That. I don't get that.
She wanted to get his attention. How else do you get your
throw a rock
attention?
Through a window.
She did that too. I mean, she did it all. She went in and cut Linda's clothes up, and I mean, she'd sneak into their house when they weren't home. She did all sorts of crazy stuff.
I would hate to see it in today's time.
Yeah.
I really would. People are crazy.
Well, I mean, the whole trial,
numbers.
Going back to court TV, the whole trial was on court TV. I remember watching it from, morning until 5 o'clock when it was done, daily. It was big news. But I mean, right, in today's news with 24/7 news, I mean, you watch it all day on court TV, and then you'd have,
with technology and stuff. It would be crazy because people can spoof numbers.
She would have been social media bullying.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Harassing.
Yeah. Sending him Snapchat pictures and stuff. Oh yeah, it could have been bad.
Yeah.
You're right.
I mean, I would hate to see it in today's time.
That's a good point.
Because it was in the 90s, 80s.
The late 80s. The divorce was finalized in 89.
Okay, so late 80s, early 90s. So to think of where we've come from.
We all had those shoulder pads.
Yeah. To think of where we've come from then till now. Like, we have cell phones now, we have internet on our phones.
Right. Yeah. You didn't even have a phone. I mean, the only people that had phones, like car phones back then, and they were like attached to a briefcase, were like richy people. And he might have had a cell phone.
Actually, I was talking to somebody, they locked their phone in their office, and I had a key to the office, and they said, "Can you let me in? I locked my phone in there. I locked my keys and my phone in there, and I wouldn't be so worried about the keys because they have extras, but I need my phone because I'm traveling." And I'm like, it's crazy because we rely so much on these phones nowadays. And she's like, "Yeah, I don't remember relying on it when I was younger." Which, I mean, she wouldn't, but yeah.
Remember that time you went to a dance over, I think it was the school you work at, and
Yes,
I had your
that was,
brother and your sister, and I had Missy in the back seat of the truck, and I was
yes,
going home, and we were hit, and I didn't have my cell phone, and I did have a cell phone, but I had left it at home
yes,
because it was still at that time frame where you didn't really. I mean, you could take your phone everywhere, but it wasn't like it was glued to your hip that time frame. And I'd gone to somebody's house and asked them to call 911. They're like, "You don't have a phone." I'm like, "I do. It's at home. Like, not doing me any good." And after that,
right.
always very, very picky about making sure I had my phone because you do not realize like how alone you are out there. And
Yeah,
luckily, it was in town where there was people around and things, and I could get help. But I mean, if you're out in the
yeah,
middle of nowhere and a deer runs out in front of you, just think about like when you're out somewhere and you don't have any cell service
yeah.
like that. So, okay, so she drove right into the front door because she needed to speak to Dan, and her children were inside that very home when she drove up inside of it. So, I mean, just think, I mean, she could have really damaged that house and it could have fallen and the children could have died, and it just could have been really bad, like really stupid choice. On April 22nd, 1989, Dan and Linda got married. Linda was worried that Betty would make an appearance and ruin the day. Linda knew how dangerous Betty was becoming and urged Dan to wear a bulletproof vest to the wedding. The wedding did go off successfully without any sign of Betty. However, after the wedding, Betty started mailing Linda anti-aging cream and diet pills slimming ads.
Okay, so I thought you said Linda started
Linda,
sending.
apparently Linda did. Well, this is what Betty said. But again, this is what Betty says. Betty said that Linda used to do that to her to kind of like throw it in her face that, I'm the younger, skinnier woman that he selected over you, you fat, ugly cow, you're old, you know what I mean? And so after the marriage, Betty started mailing Linda those same
Uh,
kind of. So I don't know what the truth is. I don't know if Linda did it and then Betty did it, or if Linda didn't do it at all and Betty just fabricated this whole thing in her head, which, as you know, narcissistic people who gaslight people do like to change the narrative and make things into something that they're not.
yeah, change. Yeah.
Change the narrative. Yep. Okay. So all in all, Betty felt threatened and replaced by a younger, thinner woman. And as an older woman myself, I have, you see those pretty girls out there, like you're a pretty girl, like, I used to look like that. Now I'm looking like this. You know what I mean? So, I mean, you do already feel some sort of way, but I guess it's worse when your husband chooses a younger, thinner, prettier woman than you are. It does something to you. It does do something to you. Um, and in Betty's case, made her go really off the deep end.
When you talk about this, it kind of reminds me of how like Candace DeLong would cover it.
Yeah, like evil women. Yeah, yeah,
Deadly Woman, yeah.
deadly women. Yeah, yeah. Like the possibility was there for her to get unhinged and go crazy and murder
Yeah.
somebody maybe, but it's just a set of circumstances. And I recently read, after I had written this and we had recorded it, I actually read that Betty actually had a boyfriend at the time of the murder of Dan and Linda Broderick.
Oh.
I didn't know that, but I guess there was a boyfriend that she had. And so, like, why didn't she invest all of her attention and everything towards that relationship rather than hanging on to this relationship that obviously wasn't going anywhere? Yes, you share 4 children together, and you have to learn how to co-parent appropriately with this person and his new wife for the sake of your young children. I mean, the 2 boys were young, the girls were older, but yeah, I mean, move on with this new man. And now she's been in jail for 40 years. Okay, so in my research, I watched many hours of the court proceedings and news articles on YouTube from reputable sources such as Court TV. I remember watching the proceedings on TV live as they occurred after the murders of Linda and Dan Broderick. If you want more reliable information, I recommend that you search for Betty Broderick on YouTube and watch the many news resources available. That's where you're going to get like an accurate portrayal and not biased by any Betty bots or, people who are pro Dan and Linda.
Betty bots?
Betty bots. People who, there are people out there that think that Betty should be released, that Betty did no wrong. Like Betty lost
I am going to say dropping your kids off one by one, and then driving your car into said home where your children are.
And then, of course, he legally takes custody of them because she obviously doesn't want them.
She is unhinged.
Right. And then when she does have custody of them, she has the little boys calling their new stepmother, see you next Tuesday, and saying all sorts of profanity, teaching your children to say that to their stepmother.
Well, when little, remember Drew was graduating and all those people were just standing there and I was holding I said, say, move, bitch, get out the way. And I said, move, bitch, get out the way.
She was a baby. She was a baby.
True. Now you can't get her to say that stuff.
No, you wouldn't know because, I mean, Al is the age of the 2 boys when their parents broke up. You wouldn't be teaching Al to say that. Think about it.
No.
I mean, you probably shouldn't have taught a 2-year-old to say that kind of stuff, but whatever.
Hey, she said it, so I'll never live it down.
Okay. Does she remember something?
No.
Okay. Well, I didn't remember.
She also headbanged to MGK in the back of the car when we were in South.
You used to headbang to Eminem, so I don't want to hear it. Yeah.
South.
Yeah. Your dad used to listen to the Osbournes. We used to watch the Osbournes as a family.
Yes.
And yeah, so
I'm the Prince of Bloody fucking Darkness. Yeah.
And I told you kids, I said, you cannot say those words in front. You can't say them at church, and you can't say them at
Who shit on my?
I set up parameters. I set up parameters for you kids that you can't say it in front of anybody else except for us, your dad and your mom, because we know where it's coming from. And you could sing songs that had swear words in them because it was already in the song, but you couldn't just come out and say the words.
Bastard dog. What's the other one? Kelly said something about her. Never mind.
I don't know. She looks awful now with her Ozempic face.
Yeah, it's something about a thong, and Sharon was like, "Why would you do that?" And she's like, "My pussy, my something." Anyways, yeah.
Oh yes, my vagina, my business. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. She didn't say the P word.
Okay. Whatever.
So Linda's fears about Dan being potentially shot were unfortunately valid fears. Betty purchased a Smith & Wesson handgun the month prior to Dan and Linda's wedding. Throughout their short marriage, Dan and Linda were harassed and stalked by Dan's ex, Betty. On November 5th, 1989, at approximately 5:30 in the morning, Betty drove to Dan and Linda's home. She broke into the front door using keys that she had stolen from one of her daughters to gain access and snuck upstairs into the bedroom. She said her intention was to talk to Dan and to unalive herself in front of them. She shot Linda 2 times in the head and chest. She was instantly deceased. Betty shot the gun 3 more times, 1 time hitting Dan in the chest, 1 bullet hit the wall, and the other a nightstand. Dan was just 2 weeks shy of age 45, and Linda was just 28 years old. Okay, so Dan was born in 1944, and he must have had a November birthday too. So he was a Scorpio as well.
Okay.
So they were probably just days short of 4 years apart then. Because the years are 3.
It's very, I don't know, premeditated, if you ask me.
Well, yeah, because they were married.
She had the intention. She had the intention of going in and killing herself. And maybe she did have the intention of going in and killing herself, but she intentionally went into that house. She premeditated going into the house and unaliving herself.
Yes.
And she might have snapped and instead shot Linda and Dan. That might not have been intentional or premeditated. But yeah.
I just think it's ironic how she hit Linda 2 times in the head, boom, boom, and once in the chest, and immediately was killed. Immediately.
Yeah.
And she only hit Dan 1 time, missed him 2 times.
And let him alone. Yeah.
And well, she let him suffer and bleed out.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. That was cruel. When Betty came into the bedroom, her entering the room woke the sleeping victims. So reportedly, Linda had called out to Dan to call the police because remember, they had a restraining order against her. So I guess her coming in, they heard her come in. And if you watch Betty on YouTube, like she says, Linda went, and I went, and the gun went off. And she's just like very, like her hands up in the air and she's going, like, because it happened so quick. So
that's not 3 times though.
6 shots. 3 to you, 1 to him, and 1 in the wall and 1 in the side table. Like,
but it seems like she had a really good shot on
the first one. Boom, boom, boom.
Yeah. That's not you're aiming.
Right. So Linda called out to Dan to call the police, and Dan was moving towards the phone to call the police. Now, I don't know if the phone was next to him in the bed or if it was across the room or if it was in the hallway outside of there. I'm not quite sure where it was at that time, but he was moving towards the phone to call the police, and they had a restraining order still against Betty. The yell from Linda startled Betty, and she reported that she did not remember the actual murders. She just remembered bits and pieces, noise, and screams. On the stand, Betty said, "I'm not going to live another day like this. I can't wake up just being absolutely at his mercy." To me, this alludes to Betty being mentally broken and unstable. Dan had moved on. Betty had stuck herself in a limbo of her own making. So Linda and Dan are buried together at Greenwood Memorial Park in San Diego. Betty alleged.
And she pulled the phone, you said, in the other.
I haven't gotten there yet, I don't think.
Okay.
Yeah, she did pull the phone out of the wall, and I guess she took it out. It was found out in the hallway, and she doesn't remember doing that.
But she doesn't remember doing that. Yeah, that doesn't make sense.
Right. Betty alleged that for many years, Dan gaslit her. He called her old and fat and ugly, air quotes, yeah. Old and fat and ugly and boring and stupid. Those were her words, end quotes. Dan told her he was bored and unhappy. It was all her fault. Betty also alleged that Dan was verbally and may have even been physically abusive towards her. As she discussed on the stand the time she had a black eye due to Dan's temper. She recalled how on her 37th birthday, Dan never came home or celebrated with her. So after her children had all gone to sleep, she slit her wrists and swallowed a handful of pills. On Dan's birthday, she figured out he had partied with Linda. So when he came home for his home cooked birthday dinner, because he asked Betty to make him pot roast because he loved her pot roast. So when he came home for his home cooked birthday dinner, she had all of his clothes in a pile in the backyard, doused them with gasoline, and burned them up.
But is it possible he just had an office party?
I don't know. When I watched Dirty Dan season 2, now again, that's a dramatic, based on facts, but it's probably not historically
they add drama to it, yeah.
She had gone to Dan's office to see him for his birthday, to have lunch with him, and she saw that there was cake and there was balloons and there was everything, and Dan was not there. And I guess somebody there said that they'd all gone out, and Linda wasn't there and Dan wasn't there. So
they all went out.
Well, at least Linda and Dan went out. But there was evidence apparently of a party in the office, and it was lunchtime, and he'd already gone out to lunch with Linda, because Linda wasn't there either. Now, Linda could have gone to lunch by herself, and Dan could have gone out with a couple of attorneys.
Yeah.
Again, that was Dirty John season 2. That wasn't anything that I saw on court TV or in the news or anything.
Right.
So, but Betty says that she went to see him and figured that he had partied with Linda. So,
which, I mean, he might have, but
he's not here. He can't stick up for himself. So.
It also could have been like an office party.
It could have been.
I'm sure people at the office knew it was his birthday too.
Right, exactly. Yeah. But she was upset that he chose to spend the birthday lunch with them and not with her. Or specifically with Linda and not with her. So she burned up all his clothes, and he had really expensive clothes, because by that time they were pretty wealthy. On the stand, Betty stated that Dan had also accused her of being a child molester, crazy, and an unfit mother.
Well, I'm going to say crazy and unfit mother, yes.
Yeah, I don't know where the child molester came in, and I never did really find anything that substantiated that allegation. But again, this is Betty saying that he said. Right. This isn't Dan on the stand saying, she's a child molester.
Yeah.
So child molester, crazy, and unfit mother. Betty stated that Dan left her destitute, although she spent a significant amount of money on clothes and home repairs. Here's the money. I'm going to show you the money. She received alimony in the amount of $16,000 a month and a cash award of $28,000.
16000.
Yes, ma'am.
A month.
Per month. And a cash reward of $28,000 on top of the $16,000 a month.
And this
is
80s. 90s.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot of money.
I mean, let's face it, in the late 80s and early 90s, that was a lot of money. That would be more than enough to get by in today's standards. What would you do with it? $16,000? Not living in the home you're living in, and not driving the car you're driving, and think about it.
Yeah. I'll take the 16.
For not doing anything, for not working.
Yeah.
And remember, she didn't have custody of the kids either. He had custody of the kids. So he had all that responsibility too. I think the 2 girls had moved out by then, so it was just the 2 boys. Kids are expensive though, so, During the trial, evidence was presented that proved that Betty had not only gone into the home and murdered Dan and Linda in their bed, but when leaving, she removed the phone from the bedroom so that Dan would be unable to call for help. The medical evidence proved that while Linda died instantly, Dan did not. Betty even later claimed that Dan sat up in his bed and said to her, "Okay, you shot me, I'm dead." She later stated he was also making gurgling noises.
Yeah.
After murdering Dan and Linda, she hurried away and drove to the beach to watch the sunrise. Now remember, she killed them around 5:30 in the morning. So, and they lived close to the beach, so it wasn't like she drove hours to the beach. They were there. Betty stated she was not in control of her actions and had very little recollection of the events that occurred earlier that morning.
But she could drive to the beach to watch the sunrise.
Well, have you ever done anything on autopilot? Like,
yeah, but
I could see her. I'm not a Betty bot at all, but I could see her pissed off at her ex-husband. Of course, I wouldn't do this, but she's nuts. I'm not nuts. I'm just mentally ill slightly. But going into your ex-husband's house with the intention to pew-pew yourself, but ending up pew-pewing them, and then not doing yourself. If I went with the intention of doing pew-pew to myself, and I accidentally pew-pewed 2 other people, I would certainly pew-pew myself right then and there, so I wouldn't have to spend my life in jail, because my life's ruined now.
She's going to see the sunrise.
Yeah, but her mind wasn't right. Her mind wasn't right, and so she just kind of left the scene. And just kind of...
She can recall him saying, all right, you shot me, I'm dead.
Yes.
She can recall gurgling noises.
Yes, because she can remember bits and pieces. She can remember the screams. She can remember the she says. If you go to YouTube and look up Betty Broderick's testimony, and when she's talking about the actual murders, like she, with her shoulder pads and her blonde curly hair, and she's just like, her hands are flailing. I mean, it's funny. You don't even need to be high to watch it and laugh, because it's hysterical.
No, I don't think she's all there. Like, I don't think she's all mentally there.
I do think maybe she did black out a little bit.
I think that it was premeditated.
Somebody would be traumatic.
I think it was premeditated.
I'm sure it was premeditated, but actually doing it and like being in shock that you actually did. She's a good Catholic girl.
Maybe it's convenient maybe it's convenient she blacked out, because I just think it's too convenient she blacked out.
Maybe. I like how you're more I don't want to say biased. More yeah, because last time you were like, oh, Betty, yes, Betty, yes, Betty. You were a Betty bot.
That's because I was not a Betty bot. As soon as you said that he was obsessive and a stalker, I was like, oh, we don't like him.
Yes, that's what you said. Yeah.
And I know this because I edit this stuff. I edit everything. I end up listening to the story 3 times, because I listen to it when we do it. I listen to it when we edit it, or when I edit it. And then I listen to it again, like as a
listener. Oh.
Yep. So I'm like I am 1 listener, but yeah. I listened to it 3 times. So by the time everything's said and done.
So you know the verbatim from beginning to end of the whole podcast.
Unfortunately.
Okay, remember, those are her words, her opinions. Are they fact-based? I'm not sure. These might be the ramblings of a delusional individual.
Oh, so we don't like her either.
So she called her second daughter Lee and went to Lee's home. Betty stated she believed that Dan was still after her and that he had sent the police after her. She went to Lee's house because Dan did not know where Lee lived, but he did know where Betty lived, which is why she did not go home.
Okay, so he probably knew where Betty lived because he had a restraining order against her.
Correct. Well, he bought the house.
And I remember being like, why didn't he...
He bought the house Betty lived in before her.
Right. Why? And I was like, I remember saying, like, why doesn't he know where Lee lived?
Because Lee lives with her boyfriend.
But now that I'm sitting here listening to this, like, she's not mentally all there. She's not, because she still thinks, well, some of this, I think some of it's very convenient, like her blacking out. I think it's very convenient, and then her saying like, "Oh, I think Dan's out to," or
well, she stole the keys from, I believe, Kim, the oldest daughter. So she stole Kim's keys to her dad's house.
But she calls Lee and is like, "Oh, he's out to get me."
Lee, the second daughter, and went to her house because Dan was calling.
she's been the one out to get him since the beginning.
But not in her mind. In her mind, he's been out to get her. He's financially starving her. You know, he is keeping the lawyer. He's bringing lawsuits against her. He is, having lawyers not respond to her or offering to help her. Like, he has made her life difficult. And all she did was give him 4 kids and support him in his early days when he was in school twice.
And drive a car through his door. And drop off all the kids.
One at a time.
Huh.
Okay. So she went to Lee's house. Betty stated that the murder was not premeditated and that she'd only gone to the house. She'd only gone to the house to ask Dan to give her the children back and to talk to him. I need to talk to Dan.
And give me the kids back, even though I dropped them off.
Right. Well, it would be the boys by this time because the kids would be the 2 boys, Dan Jr.
Even though I dropped them off.
Right. And taught them to call their stepmother. I'll see you next Tuesday. Yep. So she wanted him to give her the children back and try to talk to him.
And the kids are there when she does this. Because you said it's like 5 o'clock in the morning.
I think the boys were at her house that night.
So why did she go there to talk to the boys?
Because they had custody agreements.
But if the boy, she said that she wanted to go there to talk to Dan.
Well, I think maybe she wanted to talk to him in order to have him sign them for her to have primary custody so he could, have a nice honeymoon life with his new wife with no children.
So kind.
That was so kind of her. Right. I know. Her heart was in the right place.
Okay.
Okay, so if he did not listen to her, she would do away with herself in his home.
So what's that going to do, though? Like what?
Well, that's not going to get you your kids back. That's for sure.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Like, what's that going to do? That's just gonna hurt your kids.
She doesn't think about her kids. She only thinks about herself.
Are you armchair diagnosing her?
Well, I mean, I do have a degree in psychology. Okay, so, so if he did not listen to her, she would do away with herself in his home. Personally, I disagree with this because I am going to diagnose her. During the trial, both Kim and Lee, the daughters of Dan and Betty, stated that Betty would frequently say things like, "I'm going to kill you," but that they never really thought she meant anything by it. I find it suspicious that when Betty knew that Dan was marrying Linda, she went out to buy a gun. And that in itself, in my mind, shows some sort of premeditation. Your thoughts?
Yeah.
So remember that time when your sister was in 1st grade? This was right around 9/11.
Yes, I was just getting ready to say this, and she threatened to.
She was at school. She was at UL Gordy. You can leave the school in because the school doesn't exist anymore. And so it was a very small elementary school. She was, I think, 1st grade. And they were out on the playground, and a boy must have said to her something about he was going to kill her. And she was dumb.
She said, "No, I'm going to kill you."
And the teacher overheard that.
And he went and told the teacher
that Brianna Bonebreaker was going to kill him. And so your dad and I were called in. We had parent-teacher conferences.
Oh, they talked to me as well. The head teacher and her teacher.
Yeah.
The head teacher was my teacher at the time, but the head teacher and her homeroom teacher pulled me out, and they were like, they didn't tell me what she said, just that she was in trouble.
Yeah.
And I just remember being like, well, why am I being pulled out? But Yeah, they pulled me out too.
Yeah.
Much like when Brianna was pulled out because Drew told the same teacher, his first grade teacher, that he was Korean. She was pulled out of class by the same teacher because I think she would have been in 3rd or 4th. So she was in 4th grade. She would have had, okay, so she had the exact same teachers pulled Mrs. D and Mrs. B pulled me out of class because of something Brianna said, and then Mrs. D and Mrs. B pulled Brianna out of class because of something Drew said, because Drew said he was from Korea. And they said, you have to tell your mom, you can't be telling him that.
Yeah, but he wasn't in trouble and she wasn't in trouble. But okay, so we were talking about Brianna.
Brianna, yeah, you said Brianna wasn't in trouble.
Yeah, she wasn't in trouble. Well, she was in trouble, and I guess they had left a note or something and sent her home with a note that they needed to talk to your dad and I. But we never got the note because she was sneaky and she knew what she had done. So she disposed of the note. So when we went in for parent-teacher conferences, which was like the next week anyway, yeah, we were blindsided. But so, well, in the world after 9/11, you just can't have your kids come into school and saying that kind of stuff because it's a threat. And, and being in education, I get it.
But I don't think
the kids do say things that they don't mean.
First grade, I don't think they
said that they knew our family and they knew that, they knew the family, that, you had been through the school. And so they weren't scared that you.
Yeah, well, Brianna and I are night and day.
Yes and no. Tempers are different. Yes. Personalities are different. Yes. But the morals and values are the same.
Well, I'm not talking about that, but we are night and day.
But you're not going to come to school with a GUN and pew pew everybody. And they knew that.
No.
That was that, and that's one thing about having that school being one deep, and the teachers knew the families, the teachers knew the kids, like in these big giant schools that we have now. Anyway, so frequently saying things like "I'm going to kill you," that was in her vernacular. That was, I guess, something she frequently would say to people. So there were actually 2 trials in the Betty Broderick case. Betty's defense claimed that Betty suffered from battered wife syndrome. The prosecution argued that Betty suffered from histrionic and narcissistic personality disorders, stating that Betty was severely narcissistic and histrionic. Also testifying for the defense, clinical psychologist Catherine DeFrancesca testified that Betty was histrionic with narcissistic features.
Okay,
what does that mean?
Yes.
Okay. So the American Psychiatric Association defines histrionic personality disorder, HPD, as a personality disorder characterized by a pattern of excessive attention-seeking behaviors, usually beginning in early adulthood, including inappropriate seduction and an excessive desire for approval. People diagnosed with the disorder are said to be lively, dramatic, vivacious, enthusiastic, extroverted, and flirtatious. Okay. Narcissistic personality disorder, or NPD, is a personality disorder characterized by a lifelong pattern of exaggerated feelings of self-importance, an excessive need for admiration, and a diminished ability to empathize with other people's feelings. Narcissistic personality disorder is one of the subtypes of the broader category known as personality disorders. It is often comorbid with other mental disorders and associated with significant functional impairment and psychosocial disability. Both disorders are contained within the cluster B dramatic category of personality disorders. Okay? So yes. I don't know about the histrionic. inappropriate seduction. It's not like I don't know about that. I don't know if she was flirtatious.
Maybe when she was like with her psychologist or whatever.
I don't know. I mean, she did have 4 kids, 4 living children. She did marry young.
That's not.
She was a Catholic. Yeah, I don't know about the histrionic, but she definitely is narcissistic.
Yeah, I would. Yeah.
That's a definite yes. Betty's first trial ended with a hung jury when 2 of the jurors held out for manslaughter, citing lack of intent. Therefore, a mistrial was declared. Betty was tried a year later.
Lack of intent.
Well, I guess they believed the rhetoric that Dan specifically contributed a little bit to his own death by the financial starvation, quotes, by taking the children and not allowing her to have the children.
She dropped the kids off.
Having an affair with a younger woman, like his behavior caused her behavior, and so the intent. And she says, I went there to pew myself. I didn't go there to pew him or her. I went there. I was going to kill myself in front of him if I didn't get my way. So
why break into somebody's house though? Like, I'm not understanding.
At 5:30 in the morning.
At 5:30 in the morning.
When they're in bed, sleep.
Knowing that they're most likely asleep, what good is breaking into their house? That's intent right there. You like.
Well, I mean, maybe she was breaking in. Like she had broken in so many other times, and she never pewed anybody. She had done damage to the house. She had vandalized the house. She terrorized these 2 victims for years.
I'm glad I'm listening to this episode again, because there's a lot that I'm like, why didn't you say something about this? But lack of intent. That went right over. You did, but it went right over my head last time.
Well, remember it was first recorded February 11th. Okay. Okay. So Betty was retried a year later with the same defense attorney and prosecutor. So it was basically the same trial over again. The second trial was essentially a replay of the first trial. The prosecutor was successful the second time around, with Betty receiving a verdict of 2 counts of second-degree murder. Betty was sentenced to 2 consecutive terms of 15 years to life, plus 2 years for the illegal use of a firearm, the maximum under the law.
So 30 plus 30 to life.
Okay. Yes. 30 to life plus 2 years.
Okay, so 32 plus.
And consecutive. Life. So you do the first 15, then you do the second 15 plus the 2. Betty is currently still serving her time at the California Institution for Women in Chino, California. She was eligible for parole in January of 2010, but it was denied because she continues to not show remorse for her crime and continues to blame the victims for her choices. Betty was.
She's a narcissist. That would be.
Yeah, I only did what I had to do. I had to pew them in their sleep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Betty was also denied parole in November of 2011 and in January of 2017. Betty will not be eligible again for parole until January of 2032, when she will be 84 years old. If Betty were released today, do you think she could be a productive member of society, or do you think she would be a danger to herself or others?
Okay, so how old was she when she went to jail?
In her 30s, late 30s.
Okay, so she has been in jail since the late 90s or early 90s.
Yeah.
And
I graduated from high school in 1990, and so
she has not
wrong.
self-reflected or been like, yeah, maybe I did this, or maybe this wasn't a great idea. She hasn't shown any remorse,
Mm-mm.
anything to show that, yeah, maybe I am guilty. Maybe I did do this. So I don't believe she will be a productive member to society. I don't really
What's she
know if
gonna
she
live
would be
off of?
productive.
Who's going to take care of her? The
Well,
children
right?
that she dropped off at their dad's door?
I just, she hasn't shown any type of
No.
remorse, anything. And she hasn't even owned up to anything.
No. So Betty is estranged from her eldest daughter, Kim, and this is due to the fact that Kim has been pro Dan and Linda and supportive of the murder victim side of the story. Kim has never supported Betty being released from prison and would prefer that her mother pass away in prison rather than to be released to freedom. She does try to maintain a relationship with her mother and sends her care packages in prison. In 2010, Kim refused to write a letter in support of paroling Betty. Kim has written a book about her mother entitled Betty Broderick, My Mom. In it, she describes visiting her mother in prison as, outside of my dad being killed, it is the worst heartache and sorrow I could ever imagine.
Well, right, she lost her dad, she lost her stepmom, and in a way, she lost her mom.
Right. Now, granted, she was a grown-up when this happened. I think she took the two little boys. I'm not sure what happened to them. I think she took them because they were old enough. The girls were old enough at that time to take custody of the boys. But still, they lost their parents. They lost, if they needed money, they could go to daddy. So they don't even have that.
Mm-hmm.
They were on their own. And they were babies themselves or teenagers, early adults. So imagine how these children feel, torn between their murdered father and their convicted murderous mother. These 4 children, now adults, are also tragic victims of circumstance. Betty's second daughter, Lee, has been much more supportive of her mother, as well as the youngest son, Rhett. They both are supportive of her being released. I have not encountered much of Betty and Dan's sons in my research, especially Dan Jr. I have read that the only child that Betty has not made disparaging comments about was Rhett, the youngest son, who I believe was the one who she had call Linda the see you next Tuesday. So he was young and impressionable and repeated everything his mother told him to say.
She doesn't like her daughters.
She does not. Yeah, she has said mean things about both of her daughters and Dan Jr., the firstborn son. But she doesn't really she hasn't made any comments about Rhett, the baby. Because he was younger, and of course he didn't live through as much of the stuff as the older 3 did. And he did what mommy told him to do.
Mm-hmm.
So in Betty's book, Telling on Myself, she writes, there's no excuse for what she did, but there are lots of reasons, millions. She also makes derogatory statements about the deceased who cannot speak or defend themselves. Battered women syndrome is the psychological effects of living with intimate partner violence. Battered women syndrome is not a mental illness, but the result of what happens when you live day in and day out with trauma. However, PTSD, which people with battered women syndrome often have, is considered to be a mental illness. The physical, sexual, and psychological abuse happens in cycles. The tension builds. Then there is an outburst of violence, followed by the abuser apologizing and promising to do better. And then the cycle starts all over again.
I'm going to go out on a limb here and maybe he was abusive to her. We'll never know because we don't have his side of the story. But I'm going to take a shot in the dark and say that he probably suffered from battered spouse. I would assume.
That he did.
Yes. would not surprise me, her having these meltdowns, screaming, whatever, and then apologizing because she acted the way she did whenever they separated.
Well, I mean, she told her kids, if you don't take the trash out, I'm going to kill you. Like, she must have been really hard to deal with during that marriage. Because if she frequently said, I'm going to kill you to her children, I could imagine what she said to her husband when they were in love.
Yeah.
Battered women syndrome also involves coercive control in which the partner needs to know where she is at all times, suits her. What did I write? Well, he keeps her from friends and family and retains financial control so she doesn't have the money to leave. Partners may not only threaten to kill the woman and her children, other relatives, or pets if she leaves, but also threatens to kill themselves.
Didn't she threaten to unalive herself?
Well, she did. She slit her throat, her wrists, and she took pills. And they found her in a bathtub on her birthday or something. Yeah, so she did. So do you think Betty suffered from battered women syndrome as based on the WebMD definition?
We don't know. I'm not going to say yes, and I'm not going to say no because there's no one to defend themselves.
So I don't know if he needed to know where she was at all times. He didn't keep her from her friends and her family. I mean,
she said he was obsessive, and she said he was a stalker.
At the beginning, when he was pursuing her. He did keep the kids away from her, but I mean, how much of that was him being a protective father because he didn't know what kind of.
Yeah, she dropped them off at his house.
Well, I'm sure when they came back from visits with mom, I'm sure they had stories of mom did this and mom did that and mom did this and mom did, So okay, yeah, maybe he did keep the kids from her. Retains financial control so she doesn't have the money to leave, which is a lie because he bought her the beach house. Granted, it needed fixed up, but he also gave her $28,000 cash upon the divorce and $16,000 alimony a month. Now, granted, it is California, so things are a little more expensive out there. Mm-hmm. But she spent her money on clothes and food in the house. She did not spend her money on saving it, for a rainy day. The money came in and the money went out. She did not curtail her lifestyle. So, I mean, I don't think he retained financial control so she didn't have the money to leave. He gave her a fair settlement. Partners may not only threaten to kill the woman and her children, other relatives, or pets if she leaves, but also threatens to kill themselves. Never in any of my research have I heard any mention of Dan Broderick threatening to kill her or himself.
Just her.
It's just been her. She attempted suicide and she went to the house to pew herself in front of him. So, yeah. So I don't think she suffered from battered women syndrome. And so why I feel she did not suffer from battered women syndrome. Number one, Dan did not need to know where she was at all times. Number two, Betty was very active in the social circles and he did not restrict her social activity.
Because you said she was a socialite.
Right. Dan never threatened to hurt or kill Betty or the children. Number four, Dan did control the finances, but this could be due to the history of the family, as Betty was willing to allow Dan to control the finances for the family. Remember, she's a good Catholic girl.
Well, okay,
and made the money.
Sometimes different people, like some people are better with the finances than another person.
Correct.
Yeah.
Some, like Jay, he had an ex-wife. When he was married to one of the ex-wives, he would bring her home his paycheck and give her the paycheck. And then he drove truck at the time, I believe. And then the bill collectors would start calling and he'd be like, but I gave her money to pay the bills, but she didn't pay the bills. She bought whatever it was she wanted to buy, And I don't think that was the case in this case. Dan controlled the finances, but he made a lot of money.
He might have just controlled the
Betty lived a
finances
good
to make sure
life.
the bills were paid. Yeah.
Right. Well, the bills were paid, and Betty lived a good life. She had, that's why she got $16,000 a month, because she was accustomed to a good life.
Mm-hmm.
And she could have gotten more, I'm sure. I mean, I'm sure some of her allegations about the lawyers and stuff are accurate, but I don't think it was as severe as what she made it out to be. My personal opinion, being through a divorce myself. But I mean, we didn't have the money that Dan and Betty had either. So Betty was educated. She had her bachelor's degree and was able to work, as proven in the early years of her marriage. Betty also had a real estate license, and with her $16,000 a month alimony, could have gotten a job and lived a comfortable life.
Oh my gosh, she could have lived more than a comfortable life.
Right. She had her bachelor's degree. She could have worked in a daycare or in a school, or done something else. She could have just sold real estate. I mean, you make a hell of a lot of money if you sell a nice big house in California.
Yeah.
There's a lot that goes into being a real estate agent, but when you do make the sale,
yeah, you get a portion of it.
Yeah.
Chris is always like, let's move to California. People go to California.
Yeah,
I mean,
you guys would be living in a box if you moved to California.
Well, I know, but I mean, like,
the cost of living is so extreme.
People go out to California for some reason. They just don't go out to California. I mean, yeah, they go out to visit the beaches and they go out to do this, but a lot of times people go out to California
with high hopes.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So why I feel Betty's home life as a child may have contributed to the outcome of her marriage to Dan. So number one, Betty was born in a highly competitive family who had high expectations for all of their children. Not necessarily a good thing, not necessarily a bad thing. Number two, Betty was born and raised as a good Catholic girl. All Catholic girls are raised to grow up, stay sweet, let their husbands take charge, be supportive of them, have many children, and divorce is bad. And that really does a doozy to your brain. It really does. Like that,
yeah,
black and white. Number three, Betty has stated that her mother was not very motherly and kind. So I'm thinking that Betty was not very motherly and kind to her 4 children.
Which is weird because usually you do the opposite, but
sometimes.
Well, in those situations, a lot of the time you do the opposite. You overcompensate for what you didn't get.
Well, maybe she didn't. I don't know. But that's all I have.
Bye. See you next Tuesday.
Do you think Betty should come out and,
I don't think I don't see her being productive.
You think
I don't necessarily think that she would hurt anybody again. Oh, but I don't necessarily see her being productive. Actually, who knows? I mean, maybe she would go after our kids or something.
Well, yeah, because she's mad that, if she had just if she just focused on her new boyfriend and her new life, this whole thing would have never happened.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you for listening. You can listen to us on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
You can listen to us on Spotify. You can listen to us on iHeartRadio, Amazon, and Apple Podcasts.
Yes. Yep.
So
sometimes YouTube's a little slow.
Yeah, well, it depends on how long the episode is, I guess, huh?
Well,
I think they run it through some sort
Sometimes it takes like 2 days to process.
Well, they run it through some kind of program to make sure you're not saying any swear words and stuff.
Well, I mark it not safe as kids, so.
Right, and I think there's a rule, like first 10 minutes you can't drop an F-bomb or something.
Yeah, there's like certain words that they flag you for and whatnot.
Yeah.
In the first 10 minutes, but it's a pain in the butt to upload on YouTube. So, but I do try. Sometimes though, it just like it'll say error uploading, and I'll try to upload it again, and I just get the same message. So I'm just like, whatever, it's just not
as long
going up.
as long as it's on the Audible version is released, I don't care.
Oh.
Okay, well, I gotta go.
All right. Well.
Yep.
Like, share, follow.
Yep.
Let us know anything you want to hear.
Leave us a note in the comments, please.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
All right. Let's get paranoid.
Bye.
Bye.
What's he doing?
I'm taking his collar off.
I'm so cute.
He has, when he sits half on you and then half on the floor. He'll be doing this. This is chaotic.
This is chaotic.
How many pages of research did you do?
13.
Oh, God.
Okay, so. Hi, baby. Get down.
You're going to sit in the podcast with us?
Okay.
How about, can Pickles join?
Yeah.
Oh, look at, there's a cat.
We need to change our, instead of let's get paranoid, just be like podcasting with ADHD. I don't know. That's her new handle.
Yeah. I told Chris, I said, my superpower is being easily distracted. You know what else that comes with? And Chris was like, what? I said, being able to distract others.
You do good at it. You ready, Pickles?